Okay, so today we have multiple topics to get into. The first one was the current state of the gaming industry, and we was going to talk about basically how games have evolved, things like the evolution of graphics, how development times have skyrocketed, and how we're constantly seeing people compare the modern industry to how the old one used to be. What are your thoughts on that going into it?
Well, I still consider myself a baby gamer from the standpoint that time and money has kind of restrained me from being as deep into the gaming industry as I would have liked. I started really getting into video games when I was in my late teens to early 20s. My first video game being, or my first video game console being a PS2, and then I rapidly progressed from there. From PS2, I got a PS3, and I skipped the PS4 and I went straight to PS5. And I've been writing modern gaming ever since. So my history as far as gaming it goes, at least where I'm concerned, is fairly recent. I don't have a big history with older gaming as an industry and also as a hobby, uh, as I do when it comes to the modern gaming scene. However, being the researcher and historian that I am, I do love to do research. Um, as far as game development goes, I think what a lot of people fail to understand, especially in the modern gaming industry, is that the way that video games are made and produced now, they are made and produced as if they were big budget movies.
Yeah,
And since
exactly.
I exactly, I have a background in media and the film industry. And oddly enough, in one class that I took, I actually took this because I was interested in video game development at the time. I took a video game development basics class. And in that class, the teachers were telling the students that, and let me see, this was before COVID hit, so this was circa 2018, 2019. At the time, my teachers told me that the gaming industry is worth billions,
Oh yeah,
more
it's worth
so
more
than,
than the movie industry in some respects, I think. I could be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure it is.
no, you are correct. You are correct. They were telling me that the video game industry at the time, I'm not sure if this is current anymore with the current gaming slump that we're experiencing, but at the time this was told to me, the gaming industry was actually outstripping the film market in many respects, especially in regards to retention and engagement. There were
Hmm.
so many more people that were willing to engage with the video game and buy the video game products and interact with it as a medium than people were like buying tickets, going to the movies, streaming, buying rentals, if that's even still a thing with
Oh yeah.
movies. But that was almost 10 years ago. This is the year 2025, and we are currently experiencing a video game slump that is almost comparable to what the video game industry saw in the 1980s to early 1990s. Will
Hmm.
it get to the point to where we see a gaming collapse? I don't think so. And only because of the fact that the gaming industry has gotten so big that I don't think we'll see a collapse in video games the way we almost saw back during 40 years ago.
Well, I
But
mean, it's hard to say for sure because I mean, like, I see both sides of the argument. When it comes to games, there is no shortage of absolutely fantastic games coming out. But at the same time, we see the problem where a game that would have took a year to make back on the PS2 now takes an entire console generation to make. And we also see games getting released broken all the time. They're not performing like they should. They have bugs and whatnot. And while we are getting great games, I just feel like the development cycle of games and the troubled state that people have to play them in a lot of times has disheartened a lot of gamers. It's not as if there's just nothing good anymore. It's just the way that it's being presented to us isn't on the level that it used to be, you know?
My 2 cents is I see this as kind of a three-pronged issue. And to bullet point these three main issues, I'll run them down real quick. The first issue is patience on the part of the consumer. You have, as of right now, you have two generation gamers that grew up. Um, you have two generations of gamers that grew up where in an age where video games were being popped out of developers every year, maybe every few years at the most. But you have to understand that back during that time period, the consoles were smaller and simpler. The technology was not as robust and as wide reaching as it is now. So you were able to churn out a simple game with simple graphics and simple gameplay in a year or a little longer, depending on how grand you wanted your game to be. So you have like my generation, the millennial generation, that was mainly raised on video games. We grew up being used to having video games with a good storyline and with good content being released every 2 years or so. But that's because of back then the technology was a lot simpler than it is now. You
Right.
didn't have a fully realized 3D environment. You didn't have true to life textures on your characters. You didn't have like the the simulation of real world environments or real world graphics to grapple with. And going back to my earlier point about video games being developed like big budget movies, leads into my second bullet point that because of the advancement of technology, it's gotten to the point to where um, the inverse of video game development has taken place. The
Hmm.
simpler games that I just talked about, like the 8-bit, the 16-bit, the top-down video games, the hallway video games, all those simple type games are now being made by small companies and indie developers.
Right.
The developers that pioneered those specific types of games, like Capcom, um, Sony, Nintendo, Sega, those developers have moved away. Those developers have moved away from those simple style games. And now
Hmm.
they're in the business of making big budget games with an obscene amount of storage uh, capabilities, hours of gameplay, fully realized 3D environments. People don't realize, at least the consumer, we don't realize that that takes years to develop.
Yeah.
Like games like that are in development for years
Hmm.
because the gaming consumer doesn't realize the logistics that goes into developing a game of that caliber. Like
Hmm.
take Final Fantasy Remake for example. The two Final Fantasy games that have already come out, Final Fantasy VII Remake and Rebirth, are ridiculous in their reach of content,
Hmm.
their attention to detail, their realism. You can't churn out a game like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth in a year or
Hmm.
two.
Oh no.
You simply can't do it because of what it takes, what goes into that kind of a game takes years to develop. And you're working in a fully realized 3D environment. You're working basically in a simulation of real life.
Hmm.
If you make a game like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth like a movie,
Hmm.
you'd cast actors, you would shoot in a real life environment, and you'd have like VFX and all that. If you were to actually make Final Fantasy VII Rebirth as a movie, it takes 6 months, maybe a year. But
Right.
because you're building that world from the ground up in a digital environment, you're looking at 3, 4, 5 years tops. So because you're creating a realized 3D environment from the ground up, that's going to take 3, 4, 5 years just to develop.
Hmm.
Now, the argument that I've heard from some people in the gaming community is it is valid because there are some people that argue we don't need games to be that detailed.
Hmm.
We don't need a fully realized 3D environment to have a good game.
Hmm.
We don't need graphics so realized and so detailed that you can see the pores on the character's face.
Yeah, that's what I
We
was gonna
don't
say. It's
need
like
the environment control.
having having.
We don't need things like that. So, like the argument can be made that you don't need a game that's comparable to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth in order for it to be good. And that is a valid argument.
Mhm.
However, that's not where the money is being made. You have to
Mhm.
understand that that's not where the money's being made. Though there are people in the gaming community who want that,
Mhm.
that's not where the money's being made.
Oh yeah. I fully agree, and that's kind of why I brought up this topic in general, because I'm someone that likes having high-end games. I'm someone that will stop in a game every 5 minutes to take a picture of the environment in photo mode. I'm someone that will brag in a review about how good the character models look and whatnot. But at the same time, like at the end of the day, you get to the question, would I rather be playing Kingdom Hearts 4 like 3 years ago, or would I rather wait 6 years for the game to come out so that I can see every single pore on Sora's face? And that's where it gets to a point where is what we're getting from modern gaming worth what we've sacrificed? And basically what we've sacrificed is releases that don't take an entire console generation and stable mostly unbugged games being able to be released on day one.
Right.
It's also worth noting that there are some games out there that simply aren't meant to look realistic in style. Like there are games like say Spyro or Crash Bandicoot that just look better in a cartoony art style. They're not meant to be realistic. Um, and when you try to push everything into being more realistic, things just become less expressive. I think different art styles are important. And I don't like the fact that the arms race of graphics has just gone to where it's like, oh, how well can we make everything look? How real can we make everything look? Um,
Right.
and thankfully, some series like Kingdom Hearts have avoided that so far. Um, I think that's kind of the trap that Final Fantasy has fallen into in a little bit though, because like for example, if you take Final Fantasy 16 for example, it's a great game, but in my opinion, there's nothing as visually memorable in it as say like Final Fantasy 9 or Final Fantasy 10 because those games had distinctive art styles. You can memorize what the towns look like. You can memorize what the characters themselves look like. When it comes to FF16, I'm not gonna lie, I forgot half of the characters' names a month after playing it because none of them are that memorable.
Well, you had a very different experience than I did. Of course, you have to
Mhm.
understand that I'm coming from a place of limited experience. The only Final Fantasy games that I have played from beginning to end, like 100% completed the game, have been Final Fantasy VII Remake and Final Fantasy 16.
Mhm.
I started the OG Final Fantasy, like the PS1 version of Final Fantasy, but I never finished it.
Mhm.
And I started Final Fantasy 10, but I never finished it.
Mhm.
And so I have played, like, I've had my hands on a total of 4 Final Fantasy games. So I know for a fact that Final Fantasy 10 in its current state is visually stunning.
Mhm.
It's a beautiful game, and if I'm being dead honest, I don't think Final Fantasy X needs a remake. It's beautiful the way that it is, just on its own merits. I
Right.
don't think having a fully realized 3D environment for Final Fantasy X will really do much
Oh yeah.
to the legacy of the game, the same way that the Final Fantasy VII remakes have done.
Oh yeah.
So, as to your point about Final Fantasy 16, I will kind of push back against that.
Hmm.
Now, of course, it helps that I played the game essentially for a second time when I helped my sister play through the game. But I
Hmm.
can rattle off the names of the core cast of Final Fantasy 16 like nothing flat.
Hmm.
And because I was able to connect with those characters on a much more emotional level
Hmm.
than I have been with the Final Fantasy characters, with the Final Fantasy VII characters. Though I'm more familiar with the Final Fantasy VII characters due to my exposure via Kingdom Hearts, Final Fantasy VII Advent Children, and
Hmm.
then other forms of media that they've appeared in, I know the Final Fantasy VII characters better, but I have a better emotional connection with the Final Fantasy 16 characters. And I
Right.
think it has a lot to do with how well their story arcs were written
Hmm.
and how well they were cast. The acting in Final Fantasy 16 is god tier.
Oh yeah.
Like, Joshua is Bay, Cloud is not Cloud. Wow, okay. Yeah, it's too early in the morning for me to do this. Joshua is Bay, Clive is your classic tragic Shakespearean character.
Hmm.
And then you have Jill, who is also your classic tragic Shakespearean character, but Jill reminds me more of Aqua if she had spent a little bit more time in the realm of darkness, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but like, see, for example, the only problem with Jill is that she's a very, in my opinion, a very forgettable character. Like, she's not an Aerith and she's not a Tifa. And like Clive is a little bit more memorable because of things like his scar and the sort of like the mutated arm trope that is in a lot of anime and games. But even then, like, I don't think anyone is going to recognize Clive the same way that they recognize characters like Cloud and Squall in the future. And don't get me wrong, I'm saying that as someone that loves FF16, it's mostly like the art style. I think like if FF16 had a little bit more of an expressive art style rather than just trying to look real all the time, it would actually be more memorable. That's just my take on it.
See, that's where I kick back because, as I said, I'm a historian. Even though I have not had a lot of experience with the Final Fantasy franchise, I've I've researched its roots.
Hmm.
And I know how Final Fantasy originally started and what it was supposed to look like. And the image that people get of the Final Fantasy franchise right now, if you were to ask someone, what does Final Fantasy look like? They're going to spew something like, it looks like Final Fantasy 15. It looks like Final Fantasy 7. It looks like Final Fantasy 10.
Hmm.
Those, what, 5 games out of a, what, 15, 20 game franchise.
Hmm.
The Final Fantasy 1, 2, 11, 9. No, no, not 9. That was with Squall. 8.
Well, 8 was the
Um,
one that had Squall. 9 was the
okay,
one that had Zidane.
okay, yeah, Final Fantasy 9. Those games, and then other lesser games, all had the pseudo medieval, um, in the past identity.
Mm-hmm.
Final Fantasy 16 sticks out to me personally as being the most Final Fantasy like
Hmm.
of most of the games in the franchise, only because of the fact that visually it goes back to its roots. It's set in a pseudo medieval alternate timeline of Earth, if you will, if you want to look at it that way.
Well, that's
It's
because there was like a big split in Final Fantasy, right? There was a moment when the series was reinvented, and that moment was Final Fantasy VII. Final Fantasy VII was the first
yeah,
non-medieval game in the series. And then,
yeah.
of course, you had 8 that took it further in that direction. 9 was a game that halfway went back to the roots while still embracing what the series had evolved with. And like
Yeah.
you've had 2 games since then that did that, 12 and 16. And so basically that's how Final Fantasy has almost split into 2 genres. You have the games that go back to the roots, like 9 and 12 and 16, and then you have the games that are more futuristic, like 7 and 8 and 10 and 15.
And 13. Let's not forget poor 13.
Mhm.
13 is forgotten hard enough.
Oh yeah.
Final Fantasy the 13 franchise definitely helped further solidify its pseudo futuristic, highly anime looking aesthetic.
Oh, I'll be
But
honest, I'll never understand why people don't like 13 so much. I mean, like, I understand the points they make about it, but I don't think they're really valid for dismissing the game.
I don't think they're valid either, and I have yet to play the 13 trilogy. And that's only based on what I've seen of the franchise. But anyway,
Yeah.
back to my second bullet point about the gaming industry. Um, so I had mentioned that consumers are impatient with game development. Game development is taking a lot longer because of what goes in, the technology that goes into creating video games. And then the third bullet point about video games being released broken and with patches, I think it's a two-pronged issue with that. First issue being that gaming consumers are not patient.
Hmm.
Going back to my first point about this generation of gamers being raised where they only had to wait maybe a year, 2 or 3 years for a game to come out.
Yeah.
They're not used to waiting.
I remember when
So,
3 years was considered a lengthy development time.
right. So certain gaming companies, mainly all of them, feel pressure by the gaming community to like get this game out, get it out, get it out. You
Hmm.
know, we we don't care if it releases with bugs. We'll fix it in post-op. That's the term that's used in the filming industry.
Hmm.
Like if something is filmed sloppily, or like if there's like a big goof on set and the production is too lazy to fix it while they're filming, the term "we'll fix it in post-op" is used to clean up whatever was screwed up on set. Like they'll cover it with the visual effects or they'll tweak it somehow.
Hmm.
And that's the mentality that the gaming industry has among the game developers now. We'll fix it in post-op. We'll
Hmm.
fix it after the game is released.
And the
We'll
problem
release a
with that
patch.
is that they kind of like it's not like a hard line have to be, but they almost kind of do have to be that way because even as it is, a AAA game takes almost an entire generation to make. You have some developers that can't even make 1 game per generation for a series. It's a game every other generation. Like, take GTA, for example. I'm not a Rockstar fan, but like the last GTA game that was released was on the PlayStation 3, and now like the next one is barely making the PlayStation 5. Like it's almost going to be a PS6 game.
So I don't play GTA for very obvious reasons, but I had no idea that the last game was released on PS3.
Yeah.
They were going to miss. Why in heaven's name has it taken them so long? They've missed 2 generations of consoles. Why are they taking so long to release GTA 6?
Because essentially it is one of the biggest franchises in the entire world, and the expectations
I,
for it are higher than it could ever possibly be. And it's basically like if this game isn't absolutely perfect, it won't just be a flop, it'll be a flop of monumental proportions. They
I
have an image to meet with this game that is almost impossible to meet, and that's why it's taken so long. Granted, it was also
so
partly because of Red Dead 2, but even when you take that into account, it's still been a very long time.
so I'm going to say something controversial.
Well,
And I guess controversial in regards to like the GTA community. Since I have a background in film, I know what happens when something goes through development hell.
mhm.
Almost always, with the rare exception of a few movies, almost always, when a movie is in production or development hell, the resulting product is trash. The resulting product is hot garbage. And I think, excuse me, I think that same law applies to gaming.
Oh yeah.
The fact that GTA 6 has been in essentially development hell, because this is what it is. It's missed two console generations. You can't tell me this game hasn't been in development hell for so long. This game has been in development for so long. There is no way that GTA 6 is going to be as good as people think it's going to be.
Mhm.
There's just simply no way it's going to be that good. I don't care how good the graphics are.
Mhm.
Um, a game can look like gold, and the game itself be straight trash. Case in point, Cyberpunk. What is it? 2077.
Yeah. Now it's actually a funny case with that game because it got a really bad rap when it came out, and then I heard like 2 years later, after extensive additions and updates, it's finally considered like a good game now. But when it first came out, it was considered garbage.
Right. It was a hot garbage game. In fact, it almost sank the development team, didn't it?
Yeah, CD Projekt Red was not used to that kind of a failure because they were coming off of the success of Witcher 3, and that game was one of the most influential games of the PS4 generation without a doubt. And so for them to follow that up with a game that people had very high hopes for and then failed at, you know, that was that was probably really demoralizing. That kind of thing is exactly why a developer won't take risks anymore, though. That's another thing. Like it also restricts creativity because games are just too big to fail now. When games cost millions of dollars and take years to make, a developer is not going to do anything that they do not sincerely believe with all their hearts is going to succeed.
Yeah. Which is why you have the rise of the indie game industry. The indie video game industry, it used to be niche. It used to be very small, but now it's grown in popularity and interest because indie game companies are willing to take risks
Yeah,
and do things that larger video game companies don't. And
right.
but the cool thing is if they do take risks, they end up being successful because they take risks.
Oh yeah.
Case in point, I can name three right off the top of my head. The first and foremost being the FNAF franchise.
Hmm.
Second being that video game company which produced such fantastic games as Journey and Flower. And what was the one that they just released about 10 years ago? What was it called? Aqua or
Um,
Ocean?
I know there was one
It was
based on the ocean. I forget what it was called. I think it was something that starts with an A. I might be totally fumbling that, but I know they did release
Aqua.
one like that.
Anyway. And then the third one, Little Nightmares.
Hmm. Yeah. And, it's
So,
that kind of creativity in a lot of ways that I think has sort of carried the industry in a lot of respects. I mean, you have games like Cuphead or games like
oh
uh
yeah, Cuphead.
yeah.
Yeah, you can't forget Cuphead.
Yeah, Cuphead was a game I really liked as a cartoon fan. And, I think that them starting out as smaller developers, they're the kind of people that would have thought this is something that a fair amount of people are interested in. And they was willing to take that burn on it. Whereas when you have a developer like Call of Duty, they're just, or, Activision making Call of Duty, they're just trying to
Yeah.
take cuts everywhere they can. Like, I don't know if you heard this or not, but there was even elements of the newest Call of Duty game where they were using AI for icons and whatnot. It was very
I
weird.
heard about that, and
Hmm.
that sickens me. I
Yeah.
mean, I could go off on a complete tangent about AI and how it's decimating the arts.
Hmm.
And I love movie making and video game making into the arts. But we could have a whole other podcast on how AI is destroying the arts.
Well, I actually
But
can delve a little bit into that if you want to go down the rabbit hole a little. Um, but it's up to
maybe.
you.
But let me finish my point about how video games are released broken. The first prong to that, as I said, just to recap, was that um, developers are being pressured to release games as quick as they can because their audience doesn't know how to wait. The second prong to that third point is that there are certain developers, and I can name them: Activision slash Blizzard, Microsoft, Ubisoft, and well, no, not Capcom. I don't want to throw shade at Capcom. Ubisoft, who will release trash games, and they know that their audience will buy it. That's how consumerism works. You see this in the movie making industry. The what pertains to the movie making industry can also apply to the video game industry. You have companies like that will release broken games
Hmm.
because, number one, it's cheaper to fix it after the game is released via patches and updates to the game, but they know that they have an audience that will buy a broken game like that because they know that eventually that company is going to fix it. So the demand to release a perfect game that's not broken, that doesn't need patches,
Hmm.
um, it's how consumers will go to a trash movie simply because that's their favorite production company, or that's their favorite director, or they got their favorite actor in it. They'll go to a slop fest of a movie simply because it's from their favorite studio or it's from their favorite director, and they don't care if the movie is trash. The same
Right.
thing applies to games. So that's why you've got trash companies like Activision slash Blizzard, Microsoft, and Ubisoft who release trash broken games because they know that their audience will buy it. And
Right.
they can fix it because it's cheaper to fix it later than fix it now. Which is why, even though Square Enix infuriates me to hell and back, I have mad respect for them because, with very rare exceptions, every game that Square Enix has ever released has been a completely workable game. No patches, no bugs, with like maybe cosmetic exceptions. But like the game works fine from beginning to end. It's not an unplayable game. Like the game's perfect, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
So
Exactly. And, I think that when a game is released with bugs, like game breaking bugs or bugs that actually hinder the enjoyment of the game, that's of course the worst thing a developer can do. Now, when it gets
yeah,
to things like frame rate, that's something that I am a little kind of torn on. Like, I get that
I
having
don't
high
care about
frame rate
frame
is good, but there are some people that will literally write a game off completely because it doesn't have high enough frame rate. Like, I'm not kidding. There's a massive amount of gamers where a game having 60 frames or 30 frames per second is literally the difference between it being garbage or a masterpiece, in their opinion.
rate.
And I don't get that.
Those people are spoiled.
Yeah,
That's literally what it is. They're just spoiled.
right.
I don't care about frame rate because, quite honestly, I don't notice frame rate. I don't notice a drop in frame rate. Like if I've got a good game that like I'm immersed in the story and in the game mechanics, if I'm like knee deep in like slaughtering a horde of like whatever beasts that comes my way, I will not notice frame rate.
Right. Like
I
you
think the
adjust to it both ways, you know?
I think the only time in which frame rate would matter to me is if it affects gameplay because you have lag from action to um results,
Mhm.
you know. That would be the only instance in where I would take issue with frame rate is if it actually affected gameplay.
Right. But it's just for me, like, I think it's part of the graphical arms race and it's part of what's bloating the industry out, people being as obsessed with it as they are. Because when a developer looks at the feedback for certain games, like for example, take Plague Tale Requiem, for example, it's a really good game. It's a game a lot of people loved. But
Like, yeah, I wouldn't
when,
play Tail. I play them.
yeah, but when it first released, it was 30 frames per second, and there were so many people that just totally refused to even touch the game just because of that. And that was one of the things that just made me realize that the gaming community, as controversial as this is to say, the gaming community is part of gaming's problem.
It is. Well, let's take the mask off and expose the monster for what it is. The gaming community is very problematic. And I mean that as a general whole, like across the board. Like just the whole gaming community as a collective, is problematic. The gaming community really is problematic. And it ruins things for casual gamers like me and for passionate pro gamers like you. You
Hmm.
know. It just it ruins the whole world of gaming when you have people like that who are spoiled, who complain about frame rate, who complain about cosmetic things about a game that really don't matter,
Oh, yeah.
you know.
I've said many times I would rather have a fantastic game at 30 frames per second rather than a completely bogus game at 60 frames per second. And like people have actually gotten mad at me for saying that. But,
Right.
why is my only question? Why is that a controversial take? Like, as a passionate gamer, it shouldn't be. Yeah, the state of gaming, if I had to wrap it up, if I had to summarize it, I would say that it's very good in ways. We have received some of the best games of all time within the last handful of years. But at the same time, there are a lot of things to complain about, and I think those things will get worse if there's not a change in the market. But regardless of that, I'm not as gloom and doom as some people. I mean, in the past few years, we've received Tears of the Kingdom and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, so it's not that
Yeah.
bad.
I am I'm beyond excited for Lost Soulacide. I have not pre-ordered the game yet, but I'm beyond excited for it. It looks like a beautiful game.
Yeah, I don't know which one to pay attention to first. It's coming out one day after the Metal Gear Solid 3 remake.
Oh, I didn't know that. Cool.
Yeah, pretty interesting. So,
So,
is there any like concluding thoughts for this episode?
well, was there another topic we wanted to talk about, or was this pretty much it?
We can extend it a little if you want to.
Um,
Did you want to touch on the whole AI thing,
oh,
or do you think that's best for a separate podcast?
let me think about that. No, I think we can do AI in another podcast because there's a lot that I have to say about AI.
Okay,
So,
that'll be a whole episode in and of itself. One thing that I did want to touch on though is the state of physical media within gaming, because we talked about how games need like updates and whatnot to work now. And
Yeah.
because of that, it has kind of seriously hurt the physical media sector of gaming. And that's something that I don't like at all because, like, I know some people are 100% digital, but when it comes to gaming or any other form of media, physical media is the only thing that gives you true ownership of it. And I think that's really important.
Right. Yeah. I also have a lot to say about physical media versus digital media. And I'm coming from a place of I've seen how technology has developed over the course of time. Because I'm a millennial, I'm old enough to see the progression of analog to digital and physical to non physical. I remember when VHSs were in their heyday, and you went from VHSs to DVDs, and then you went from DVDs to digital downloads, and then you went from digital downloads to streaming, and now everything is on streaming. Um, Gaming is heading in that direction. The same way that, again, to make comparisons to the film industry, the video game industry is heading the same way that the film industry is heading, because the film industry is suffering from the same exact problem that the video game industry is. Um, DVDs are being phased out. About 2 or 3 years ago or so, it was reported that some stores in some countries, like in Australia, are no longer selling physical DVDs.
Yeah.
They're not selling them, like Best Buy. Best Buy is no longer selling physical DVDs.
Yeah, I think
Everything is
these days it's like
down.
90% Walmart and Amazon are the last two big retailers for physical media. And
Yeah,
there is a
exactly.
fair amount of it still being released, but there's also like a bunch of stuff that's just going directly to streaming, or there's games that are just getting released digitally and they never get a true physical copy. And
Yeah,
basically, what that means is that media preservation, or the ideal of actually being able to own your media, is slightly going away. Like the ideal of being able to own something is getting less and less relevant every single day. And
it is.
that's something that really saddens me about the media industry as a whole.
It's a two-pronged issue that people really don't realize. The biggest issue for why physical media is disappearing is because of control. These companies in both the gaming industry and in the filming industry, these companies have realized that once they have you as an audience member on their fish hook, they can do with you whatever they want because they know that you will buy whatever they're selling, and that you're so desperate to consume their media that if they take one source of that media away, you'll get hooked on whatever source of media that they provide for you, be it streaming for the film industry or be it digital download for the gaming industry. And the thing about that level of control is, take Nintendo, for example. I'm going to throw shade at Nintendo. They are now requiring you to download their newest games and even some of their retro games. They're phasing out, getting rid of um, their physical media. It's all download. You have to purchase a license in order to download their games and play their games. So
Well,
you essentially own those products. You have a license to play them, but you don't own them. That is a way of control. They
yeah, that's how it is for pretty
control.
much all third-party releases on the Switch too. Now, as of right now, their first-party games that are actually made by Nintendo, those are still being put on actual physical copies for right now. But I'm
Right.
afraid that this whole third party key card nonsense is eventually going to spill over into their first party stuff. And that'll be very bad when that happens.
It has a lot to do with money and microtransactions. They know that they can charge you for a key card for every single purchase you make rather than buying a one-time payment for a piece of physical media. So, like, for
Yes.
example, if your Switch breaks, say your Switch breaks, you lose all the content on your game.
Uh-huh.
You don't have a physical, like a physical disc or a physical cartridge that you can
Uh-huh.
just buy a new Switch and re-download your game,
Uh-huh.
because that's re-downloading the game for free. If your Switch breaks and you lose all your games, then you buy a new Switch and you have to re-download, you have to pay to re-download those games again.
Well, you can actually download them again without any fee, but the problem with it is that they can theoretically take it from you whenever they want. Like for example, if they decided that they wanted to just pull the game from the store, or if they decided that they wanted to just kill the server, there's nothing anyone can do to stop that
Right.
because when you own a game digitally, you don't actually own it. You just own the right to play it.
Right.
It
Right.
reminds me of what happened with the PS3. I think it was back in 2020, somewhere around there. They tried to shut down the PlayStation Store on the PS3, which basically meant everything that was up for purchase once upon a time would then be gone. And this caused people to get extremely angry at them. And they eventually reversed their decision. But if they had gone through with that, they basically would have killed several titles that were only available on there, and people
Yeah.
wouldn't have been able to access them.
Yeah. Exactly. So it's all about, I hate to use conspiracy theory language like this, but it's all about controlling the narrative. It's all about the companies controlling what you as their consumer can and cannot do with their product, which quite frankly is ridiculous.
Right.
As a creator myself, having released a book, I'm working on another book. When I throw my story out there into the world,
Uh-huh.
I have no control over what my audience does with my story. I have creative rights over my story, yes, but I don't have control over what my audience does with my story. They can do to my story what they want because I took the risk and threw my story out there into the world. They can do with it whatever they want. And I think that as it pertains to the gaming industry, I think that some of these companies like Nintendo and Microsoft and Sony have forgotten that there is that relationship between them and their audience. And that is one of the main reasons why the gaming industry has lasted for so long, is that people can do to these games what they want, and they can modify them in such a way that you can create a completely new game. You know.
And it's also because gaming as a whole is just such an expressive art. It allows you to feel an emotional investment into the characters and into the stories that you can't feel with any other form of art because the other forms of art are not uh they're not interactive in the same way that gaming is. Gaming is a form of art that allows you to take on a role of its leading character, so to speak, and that just provides a different feel to the stories it tells, and that has also added to its longevity.
And the second prong, I think, when it comes to the phasing out of physical media, I would say this is probably to a much lesser extent, has a lot to do with pricing.
Mhm.
It costs more now in this day and age to produce something on a physical disc that you can hold in your hands than it does to download it,
Oh yeah.
because you have to pay for the cost of packaging, you have to pay for the cost of distribution, you have to pay for the cost of the design of the package, you have to pay for the cost of the disc, you have to pay for the cost of what it takes to to put that digital media onto the disc. So
Yeah.
like that's like 5 or 6 things that is an addition that you as the publisher have to pay for if you're going to put your product onto physical media. That's why video games are so gosh darn expensive right now.
Mhm.
The people in the gaming community are complaining about how expensive video games are if you purchase physical media, but they don't understand that the cost of inflation, at least here in America, has gotten so ridiculous that for certain gaming publishers, it they lose money putting their games on physical media because of how much it costs to produce said physical media than just releasing it straight to like digital download, or in the filming industry's case, digital download or streaming.
Right, because when they
Um,
do that, all they have to do is put it on a server and let people download it. That's 100% why they are pushing, the all digital future or whatever. And for streaming services, it's also because like Hulu or Disney Plus, they would rather you pay their monthly fee than just buy a one-time product and never have to pay them again to access the content. Um,
yeah,
but it's also that, but the weird part about it is a lot of times you can access physical games cheaper than you can digital games. Like, I'm not even kidding. If you look at a game that is 4 or 5 years old, in many cases, it'll still be full price on its digital storefront. Whereas if you go into a GameStop, it'll be like half or less.
I think that
Yeah.
a subset of that probably has a lot to do with the fact that it's getting more common among the general public to download digital media than it is to own it.
Oh, yeah.
It's like when society as a whole switched from analog phones to iPhone.
Hmm.
The number of people that still own analog phones, and by analog I mean like a landline, a
Right.
landline. The amount of people that own a landline phone in America are now in the vast minority,
Oh, yeah.
like the minority of the minority. Actually, to plug into this, I don't know if you're aware of this, but I read an article online yesterday that talked about AOL is permanently shutting down their analog um, connection, and by analog I mean dial-up. They're shutting they're shutting off dial-up internet. First of all, I thought dial-up internet was already shut off
Hmm.
when America switched from dial-up to uh, satellite.
Hmm.
Way back when, was it like 2010 or something like that when we made that switch?
I think it was
I
around
thought,
that window. Yeah.
yeah, I thought dial-up died when that happened. I had no idea that dial-up was still. I didn't even think dial-up could still function in
Hmm.
this digital age. But I found out through the article that I read that 160,000 something people in households in the US still use dial-up internet. 160,000 Americans still use dial-up internet.
When you think
I didn't
about it,
I
though,
think
like,
how how is that possible? How can dial-up internet still function in this day and age?
I
And
imagine it would
so,
only work for things like reading emails and stuff. Would have to be the only way because, like, I remember back when dial-up was widespread, and
mhm,
it was basically like it would take 10 minutes for me to download an image back when dial-up was widespread, and I used to
yep,
download
I
like
remember
Kingdom
dial-up.
Hearts videos, like cutscenes and whatnot. It would take all day to download like a 5-minute video. Like, it was
I remember
insane how
dial-up.
slow it was.
I remember dial-up internet.
Mhm.
I'm old enough to remember that. But anyway, and so AOL is going to shut down their dial-up internet, which means that 100,000 people in the US will effectively not have internet,
Mhm. I
you
mean,
know.
at this
But
point, they probably was paying just as much for dial-up as they would something like broadband internet. I mean, it's very odd.